My guest this hour, this show is, needs very little introduction. He's an author. He is the presenter of the BCFM, not the BCFM Politics Show, which airs out of Bristol every Friday at 5. It is terrific. Great guests, great analysis, always interesting. And of course, he is a former BBC journalist. And Tony Gosling, you arrive on this programme today at a very strange time in the history of this programme, would you believe?
What's that?
We've been hacked, seriously hacked. I've never made a claim like this before in my life. I hate the truthers who claim to be targeted and attacked and all of that nonsense. But the program has been attacked out of the United States by a serious hacker. He's made very little secret of it. They took the website down earlier on, and they took the live stream down. It's hosted by Shoutcast in California. So we're recording as if we're live, and this program will be on Spotify later on and iTunes, but hacked T. So we're live, but we're not live. Welcome.
Well, okay, as live. I'll try not to make too many mistakes, so you have to edit me afterwards then. All right.
You've never made a mistake in your life. As far as I know, you've only been wrong one time in your entire life. Once in your life, in your 60 years, in your 55 years. And that's the time you thought you were wrong. So that's the only time. That's a great Irish. So you can have that one if you want. Hey, listen, there's so much to get into. And in a few minutes, we'll talk about earthquake-causing technology, which when I mentioned today online that you were coming on and that you might be talking about this, everybody's ears kind of pricked up. But before that, the Russian President Vladimir Putin made a State of the Nation address today. Do you know, when I was listening to the BBC today, I thought of you, and I thought how appalled you would be by how the standards have slipped at Auntie, where you, of course, worked with distinction. You have presenters now on BBC programmes, Tony, referring to the President of the Russian Federation as Putin. It's disgusting, isn't it?
Well, I mean, yeah, and I think, the actual standards at the Beeb now are really appalling. I look at the BBC World News a fair bit, during the day, on and off. And I see basically school kids turning up as if they know what they're talking about and pretending to be journalists. There was one of them, Katie Austin. I shouldn't name her, but I am. She worked with me here in Bristol. I mean, okay, she's not a school kid now, but she didn't really show much aptitude for knowing, what the world was about. And she's now some BBC transport correspondent. She was a kind of someone who's quite ambitious. She's looked good, but the idea that she was going to investigate anything correspondence. People don't necessarily know this, that you start as a reporter and you become a journalist and eventually a correspondent. Obviously, you can, there are a few tiers above that, but correspondents have got to go and dig out genuine, fresh stories. They're going. A lot of the local correspondents here, we don't any longer have a Points West regional BBC television, regional news, home affairs correspondent, for example. Their job, a correspondent, we did actually up until about 2 years ago or a year ago, but their job is to go and dig out fresh news stories and to actually, to do the real job of a journalist, which is to investigate and share those investigations with the public. I suppose a little bit like the police, to go and dig stuff out. But they simply don't do that anymore. And, what they've done is they've just put these kids in there, and you end up with the kind of narcissistic stenographers basically just copying and pasting and saying what they think they're supposed to say, because they know that if they don't say what they're supposed to say, they may not have their job the next day. And I think it's also worth recognising that the Journalists Union, the NUJ, is still very important at the Beeb and in many other workplaces, because what they will do is if anyone is targeted because they have just simply told the truth, and some editor doesn't like what they say, or a manager or a business person or a politician like Peter Mandelson, somebody like that, has decided that they want that person out and they're pulling some strings within the corporation, then the union makes sure that they're defended, robustly and legally, and that they can't just be hoofed out of their jobs. So there is a bit of pushback, but slowly but surely the corporation's being dismantled. I remember chatting to a friend of mine who still working in there. He's just retired, but he was a few years ago now saying we are effed, because of the way that the corporation, there was another sweeping load of redundancies going through the BBC here in Bristol. And slowly but surely it's being emaciated and turned into literally an Orwellian government state propaganda service, civil servants just churning out whatever the government tells them to.
And people will lap it up as they do, and we could spend hours on that. It's really important that let's talk about the Russian president then. Before you jump right in there and give us your take on it, he will never have had a bigger global audience than today. As far as I know, most Western 24-hour news channels carried his speech in its entirety. Admittedly, of course, he was speaking through an interpreter, the 2 hours of it. And he said the things that we would expect him to say, and I can't argue with anything he said. He talked about the coup in 2014. He talked about the Donbass region, Russians there. He talked about the Nazis in Kiev. He said that, the US and its Western allies are engaged in coups in other countries. All true, but with such a global audience, what I cannot understand, and please hear me out before you jump all over this, is why he didn't say, listen, let me level with you. This is what we want. We're tired of our bordering neighbours. We're tired of our neighbours who border us joining NATO. We're tired of the bases. We're fed up of it. We want to live in peace. We can't allow this. We want to end this, and we'll end it tomorrow. Let's sit around the table. You know what we want. We know what you want. Let's end this once and for all. But he didn't. And I don't understand that, why he made no appeal to the watching Western audience, to the men and women sitting down watching Sky News and BBC News 24. Why didn't the Russian president try and speak to you and me, Tony?
Well, that's a good question. I think he's already spoken to his own audience about, he was saying as part of the speech, I didn't listen to the whole thing, so you have an advantage of me over that. Yeah. But he did say something about doing everything they could to do negotiations. And we know they've done that through the Minsk agreements since 2014 to try to draw a line and say, well, look, no more. And I noticed also he said something this time about something which I've been banging on about, very few other people seem to, about the Ukrainians saying they wanted to acquire nuclear weapons at the Munich Security Conference last weekend, a year ago. So anyway, I mean, they have done everything, I think. They now realise that the West doesn't want to negotiate. And I think what's been going on the last year is that, because the November 2021, the Russians were appealed to both NATO and the US and the Europeans to come to some sort of better agreement with security in Europe, and they didn't even reply, not interested. And so the Russians are saying, well, look, these guys are not actually listening, they're not serious, and a lot of that sort of thing in his speech, saying that there's no point in talking to these people because they don't actually want to negotiate. They have just decided that we are the devil, we are the enemy, and they want to fight us. And so there isn't really any point in trying to negotiate in that atmosphere. And I think what's happened is the last year, what we've seen is a slow slog. And if you look at the amount of territory the Russians have taken around the Black Sea and in Lugansk and Donetsk and the old Donbass, which was getting shelled, it's pretty substantial, but they've done it slowly. And during that year, the messages really should have been loud and clear over here. Look, you've got a year to negotiate and put a stop to this. And if you can properly negotiate, if we can get rid of this kind of what they say is this neo-Nazi faction, which is clearly there in Ukraine, then we'll just, we can sit down, negotiate, and we can stop this war. But I don't think the West really wants that. And I think Putin's realised that they are going to have to do this on their own. And he said, as you probably know, last week, Lavrov, that their foreign minister, that they want to have there's going to be some kind of world attention grabbing thing happen this Friday on the anniversary. So quite what that is, I don't know. But I think the Russians are sending out a message that, well, the West doesn't want to negotiate. They're not ready to make a deal, and so we're just going to have to get on and do this all on our own.
What does it mean for the rest of us? So if the West continues to supply enough munitions to Ukraine to enable it to at least stay in the fight in the east of Ukraine. That suggests that this could go on for a long, long time. If it does go on, why not?
It all depends on the rate at which the Russian forces are pushing forward. I mean, they could do a kind of blitzkrieg on Friday. And who knows, we could see a massive roll forward and a lot more people would die, including civilians and Russian soldiers and Ukrainian soldiers. But so far they've tried to, I think, minimise civilian casualties and minimise casualties all round to show, well, look, this is one speed of doing things. So I would not be at all surprised if we see a kind of blitzkrieg on Friday and everything sort of, moves forward very fast from there on.
Because, and that might be right and that might happen, because it seems to me that those behind the agendas, the technocratic, transhumanist agendas that we talk about that want to push us into dystopia, it suits them for this to be a protracted, long-running, never-ending thing because it can be blamed then on never-ending energy price rises and cost of living price rises.
It suits the arms industry, doesn't it? I mean, this is really important. Another very important thing that Putin said was that they're pulling out of this Strategic Offensive Arms Treaty, which is about nukes. They're also saying that if the US starts testing any nuclear weapons, Russia will also be testing nuclear weapons in the atmosphere again. So that could mean the end to this since the 1950s, I think. It's been the Atmospheric Test Ban Treaty will be out the window. And also he's made I think one of the most important things he was saying was about long-range weapons, because the NATO countries are starting to supply these long-range weapons, which can reach right into Russia. So what does that do? Then the Russians have to sit there on the map with a I don't know, like a ruler or a compass or something and measure, okay, so if they've got these weapons that have got 200-mile range, well, we need to take the territory 200 miles into Ukraine now. So that's how the West is stepping this thing up. What they're doing is if they've got longer range weapons, the Russians are going to have to take more territory. And then if they get even longer range weapons, they're going to take even more territory. So that's how I think that the Western arms industry really, which is driving this. And it was really interesting to hear on the Scott Ritter show a couple of weeks ago, one of the Russian ex-airborne military commanders saying this exactly. Look, this is what their game is. That we are having to negotiate. Really, if we were to negotiate a peace here, we would have to be negotiating with the Western banks and the Western arms manufacturers and the Western arms lobby. The politicians are just doing whatever the banks and the arms lobby tell them. So there's very little point in engaging with the politicians. So and the other thing, of course, is the Russians are not fighting a propaganda war at all. They have completely ceded that to the West. They don't seem to be able to or want to, put their point of view to the Western public. Except occasionally in days like today where we see a speech by Putin, but they are not trying to fight. They're just trying to basically establish a control of the battlefield, and they still want those two aims. One is the denazification of Ukraine, and number two is the demilitarization of that east of Ukraine, so that it's no longer a threat to them. And it would seem to me very simple to sort this out. Of course, Boris Johnson flew over to scupper the negotiations in March. Was it March last? I think it was April maybe, 2022. As they were about to sign some sort of peace agreement saying, oh, okay, here's the line, let's stop fighting. Boris actually went over there to stop it. So the West doesn't want to stop this because I think they see in this kind of Orwellian fashion that they can use this war against us, Richie, that all these various measures, like the so-called sanctions, which have just backfired on the Western populations, particularly here in Britain with the gas prices and the fuel prices going up, that this is a way to beat the British public down, to stop resistance. And by the way, I must say, we've got this meeting going on Saturday for anybody that's in London or wants to go to London on Saturday, where they're announcing the venue the night before, I believe, called No to NATO, No to War, with a whole load of people speaking. Where are the Stop the War coalition? They're nowhere. They're controlled, I'm afraid. It seems obvious to me they're totally controlled. They're saying Russia's got to pull out of Crimea and all this kind of thing. What a load of nonsense. So the Stop the War Coalition that organised this massive, 3 million people back in 2003, has just sold itself down the river, and the various people who want Britain to leave NATO and want to stop this war by really stopping NATO supplying arms to Zelensky, etc., and money. They are meeting at a secret venue because they've already had 2 venues cancel on them in central London somewhere. So that is going to be something. It's like a rave, basically. People will be texting around the venue.
Imagine that
on the Saturday morning.
In this day and age, as people have to resort to such subterfuge to be allowed to come together and to discuss geopolitics. It's tyranny now, and I hate to say that because it's a cliche, it's an awful cliche, and I say it probably too often on the programme, but these are tyrannical times now. They just are.
They are, yeah, they are. But the thing is, it's not really being announced. The tyranny is not announced. It's quiet. You don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So what they're not telling you is all the things you need to know, but you don't know that you need to know them, and that's basically what they're up to right now. So, I mean, the other thing is, in the speech is very much aimed, I think, at a domestic audience. This speech of Putin's is he's talking about food prices over there, and he's saying how we've been very successful in lowering food prices. We're trying to help families because we realise that this is it's tough. Russia's got to become more self-sufficient, but we've got the ability to do it. He's talking about housing, things like that, making sure that everyone has got decent homes. As I'm sitting in a situation where I may be evicted from my home here in Bristol, because of the council playing games with their housing benefit and things like that, I've got to suddenly, fight not to be evicted. I send in my tax return, which shows how much my income is, but then the council says that's not enough. We need to see your bank accounts. I send them in some bank statements, and they say, we didn't receive them, and so we've just cut off your housing benefit. You're going to have to start again from scratch. And by the way, here's a £400 council tax bill for the last 2 months.
In fact,
it's probably more than that.
I'm genuinely gutted to hear that, mate, and you're not the only friend of mine who's told me something similar recently. Do you think, because you've been very vocal in attack?
I just think what's happening is, loads of people are being. What I'm saying is our government representatives are part of the cost of living crisis. They are also helping to implement it by being very strict, and they've basically turned themselves into businesses. They want to turn a profit. We've just had a whole situation here in the Bristol Harbour where hundreds of people who are living on boats and stuff in the harbour have been told you're going to have a 200 or 300% mooring fee increase, or you can take a running jump. Now the council are quite happy. The council, are quite happy to have the super rich park their, super yachts there, so long as they're paying whatever it is, £1,500 a month to park there. But people who are actually living in the harbour are being evicted. I mean, they're not actually being evicted yet, as far as I know. But that's the attitude: is government is a business, and the citizens are just a source of money. And if you haven't got the money, well, it's a bit like the care in the community. We're going to turf you off on the streets, and you can fend for yourselves.
Tony Gosling is our guest. Thisweek.org.uk, Bilderberg.org, broadcaster, author, of course, former BBC journalist. Sorry to hear about those troubles to you. I hope you get that sorted, pal. I really do. And by the way, on that, this man has never asked for money in all the years I've known him. If you listen to the not the BCFM Politics show, which is excellent, support it. Send a couple of bob to it every month. You've got to do that now. All right, you buy Netflix, you buy Amazon Prime and all that. Spend some money with the independent media and help out guys like Tony Gosling. You said something to me today. It wasn't the first time I've ever heard this in my lifetime, and I'm really intrigued by it. I remember many years ago meeting Nick Begich, talking about HARP, the high altitude research program thing that fires rays into the ionosphere and great stuff, and weather manipulation and all of that. And not long after that, somebody got in touch with me from California and said, Richie, for a long time, the people who rule us, they've had the technology to move mountains. And I'm like, what? Well, earthquakes, Richie. It is possible, I was told many years ago, to initiate or to trigger an earthquake. Now, this is prescient because you've been looking very closely at the recent earthquake in Turkey and Syria, which has caused catastrophic loss of life and got so much media coverage here and everywhere else. And you're very interested, T, in this technology and who would want to use it and why.
Well, the Senator Diana Sosoaca, she's from Romania, and she's a bit of what you might call conspiracy theorist, but she backs up what she says with some facts. She says, and she said this almost immediately after the earthquake, and if anyone wants to follow it up, it's up on the Voltaire Network's English website. Well, it's in all sorts of languages, actually, but if you're on a Voltaire article, just click whatever language and it will translate it to that, take you to the right page. But she says it was caused by the United States, and she said that in the Romanian parliament. She's quoting various evidence, some of which is a bit it's difficult to stand some of this stuff up. I'm not very good on Romanian, so
me neither.
But one of the absolutely definite things is the fact that the Americans have before been accused of this, particularly by the Russians and elsewhere. And the Haiti earthquake in 2010, as she points out in this article on Voltaire Network, or they do, Thierry Mason does. And by the way, Thierry Mason was one of the first people. I got 2 books from him through the post about 2 or 3 months after the 9/11 attacks, which proved to be some of the best. I mean, he was amazing.
Yeah.
He seems to be on the case anyway. And, so that, the actual evidence seems to be that the Americans have been testing this sort of stuff for a long time. The 2010 Haiti earthquake, they had a whole disaster team who were just about to start a disaster exercise, and the disaster happened. The Russians said, we believe that this fault was somehow triggered from below. And even back at the end of the Second World War, this article points out that the Americans were successfully testing ways to start tsunamis, and this was never released at the time. This is at the end of World War II. But it was released under the Freedom of Information Act over in New Zealand, because the American documents had been shared with the New Zealanders, and the New Zealanders rather nicely leaked it to for the rest of us. And so it's not as if they're not interested in geoengineering. They certainly are. And of course, it is quite feasible that you can have a company, a business, maybe even a Turkish business that has some kind of CIA cover or an American intelligence cover or whatever, that's drilling boreholes in the area where this earthquake took place. And these days, of course, it's quite simple to just put mini nukes down there. Now, how you trigger it and whether that is actually what's happened, this is certainly feasible. So it should be being looked into, I think, very, very carefully, that because the political circumstances around the time where the earthquake happened are very important. But at the end of January in Sweden, which NATO very much wants to join NATO, there was a Quran burning. And the Turkish looked at this and said, well, you want to join NATO? You sort out your Quran burning, then we'll think about joining NATO. So they sent a very clear message out, the Turks, that Sweden ain't joining NATO unless they can sort this out. Now, this angers and enrages, of course, the Americans, and other members of NATO are starting to think, well, whose side of Turkey on here? Maybe we should just boot them out of NATO and then we can get on and let the Swedes join. And anyway, if you go back to 2014, I think it was, the Americans tried to stage a coup d'etat in Turkey, which the Russians warned the Erdogan government about a few days beforehand, quietly, and he managed to survive it, and the coup failed. But there was an American coup attempt in Turkey. So obviously, there's no love lost between the Turks and the Americans, but the Turks are somehow still in NATO. So, and then what happened was the Americans issued a warning. They said, well, look, we think there's going to be a terrorist attack on a mosque in Turkey. We've got intelligence that it's going to happen. And so we are going to close all the Western embassies, apart from the American embassy, were closed in Turkey, and there was a travel warning issued, like literally a couple of days before the earthquake took place. So what she's saying, this is Diana Sosoaca, is what lots of people in that part of the world are saying, but we're not hearing anything about this at all. What she's saying is the earthquake was caused by the US, Richie.
Wow. So look, leaving aside the Turks and the Swedes and all of that, the US, I mean, you look at the US and motivations, destroying a country because it opens up opportunities for its own multinationals to go into said country to rebuild it, possibly.
Well, it's partly that, but look, this is very crude. This is Al Capone tactics, isn't it? They go over to Turkey and they say, look, there's going to be something very bad happen here. Yeah. So So just drop your, they're not even saying drop your objection to Sweden joining NATO. They're saying, look, you want to do that? And in fact, I know Stoltenberg was over there last week, and he said, it's your choice, you choose. So they're not saying anything about the earthquake at all, But, it could be that this is just simply their way of sending a very clear message to the Turkish leadership. Like if you start trying to say that Sweden can't join NATO, then, you're going to have to make some big decisions because your country could just fall. In fact, we've just had another earthquake today. Now, this, of course, could all be natural, But all I'm saying is it's an interesting coincidence, the politics of it, and also this, this history that there is of this kind of geoengineering. You think about, a nuclear bomb. There's nothing to stop the Americans testing this stuff again and again around the world. The nuclear test ban treaty is only for tests in the atmosphere, so they could be drilling these mini nukes down into the ground, playing around with them over the years. And obviously, if you put it along a fault line, things are going to happen. There were several indications that there was a bit of a bizarre earthquake. It went on for a very long time, and even people in Turkey who'd experienced previous earthquakes said this one was weird.
And like we said at the outset of this chat about this earthquake, it's catastrophic, isn't it? The loss of life. I mean, they had one in 1999. This is, what is it, 30,000 people now. I mean, those numbers are almost impossible to comprehend.
Say something about earthquakes, something really simple. If you were a responsible ruler of a country, which there doesn't seem to be any of those around, you would say in an earthquake, talking about San Andreas, for example, in California, nobody builds above 2 stories. Yeah, nobody in this area. Simple as that. Now, of course, the property owners have got a little, they're thinking, well, I don't give a damn about the people that are in these tower blocks, but if we can get 13, 14, 15 stories or more, then, we're doubling our money, quadrupling it 10 times. So the people who are living in there are told, it's earthquake safe, No, don't build over 2 stories in an earthquake zone. And those zones should be just circled, and we know where they are. And nobody should be building high in those areas. Look, this is all just a property scam, these skyscrapers anyway. So let's just stop people building them there, and then far less people will be dying.
Tony Gosling is our guest. The time is 2.5 minutes to the top of the hour. I don't even know why I'm saying that, T, because it isn't live. But old habits do die hard. Let me get a quick thought from you on what's happening in my country, in Ireland. There's been a real movement, a grassroots movement against illegal immigration in Ireland, and the media in the country has done everything in its power to paint the movement as racist and far right wing and all of that, but it isn't. It's people coming out of housing estates like Ballymun and Finglas, and they're objecting to direct provision centres where illegal migrants, many of them undocumented, coming into the country, not just from Ukraine, but from Somalia and parts of Eastern Europe. And one of the things that some of these groups were claiming a couple of weeks back, they were claiming vociferously, they were saying, look, a lot of these people are coming in, and look, we are Christians. We do want to help people when people need to be helped. But a lot of them are coming in and they're undocumented and they're tearing up their documents before they even get to Ireland. Now, when this claim was made, again, they were lambasted as bigots, as little Irelanders and all of that nonsense. And NIMBYs, not in my backyard. But this morning it was announced in Ireland that 61% of people who arrive in the country looking for international protection, as they call it in my country, 61% T, not a sausage, nothing that identifies them or gives any clue as to where they came from and who they were in their previous life. That's got to be a concern, right?
Well, no, not necessarily, because, if you are a genuine asylum seeker, you may be wishing to hide your identity. You might want to burn, if some government is after you somewhere, or maybe, whoever it is that's persecuting you, maybe it's a political movement, maybe it's Nazis, maybe it's, who knows? It could, God knows who it is.
Maybe it's a criminal. Maybe it's a criminal.
You might be the only way you can safely travel is incognito, because you just don't want anyone to know where you are.
I get that, and I totally agree with that, and I made the point earlier on before you came on. But what about the concerns that some of these people might very well have criminal records, and some of those crimes may have been sexual crimes? I mean, this is no joke, right? The Irish Garda Síochána, they won't talk about this, but there are videos online of some of these people behaving terribly towards women. and committing acts of violence. So these are legitimate concerns. Of course, you're right. Some of these people have very good reasons for being anonymous because they are running for their lives from despots overseas. I totally get that. But aren't people in Dublin and elsewhere in Ireland entitled to at least imagine, well, maybe some of them are very bad people indeed?
Well, okay. So there is an enormous, massive attempt to bring migrants over. The mafia are doing it. From Africa, from Asia, all over to the West. Now, I think this is part of a much bigger. Take a step back for a minute. It's part of a much bigger effort to create a world government, should we say? Where these borders are. Anyone that really wants to go and work in another country, you can pretty much do it these days. If you can. There's very little real independence of individual countries. Look at Scotland and Wales, the way they've been sort of slowly divided off. Look at the way Ireland's been divided off with the protocol and all that. So I think what's going on here is you've got an attempt to completely undermine living standards, trade union representation, culture, individual national culture, through the use of mass migration, rather like, the way that the Irish were chased off across the Atlantic through the famines and things like that. This is a strategic thing that's being done from above to us. And, this is also a punishment for Brexit that Britain's been getting. I mean, obviously, you're having to still deal with Brussels over in Ireland. But it's a way of trying to get rid of national identities, not just through, national governments and impoverishing them through debt and the fact they haven't got any money anymore to spend on social security and looking after people, or, making sure that everyone's got water in Ireland or whatever, which happened after 2008 and the financial crisis. So I think that's really what's happening, Richie, is you're just part of a bigger, much, much bigger game. And you are going to have cheap labour being brought in. I mean, we see all sorts of businesses here thriving who have simply, people who come across on these illegal migrant crossings are just put straight into jobs like things like tree felling, all sorts of things like this. Yeah. They're given these jobs, and that is. It's a way for employers over here to just have to pay only a third or a quarter or maybe a half of the wages that they would if they employed the domestic population. So it's a double whammy. It's a cultural destruction, but it's also undermining people's ability to pay the bills and make a living.
You are right, and this is why traditionally trade unionists in the 1970s and 80s, who could not be described as racist, this is why they sounded the alarm about low-skilled immigration and what it would do to British men and women and their job prospects. Look, let me ask you this. I think I've known you many, many years, and I think our politics, when we were younger men, our politics were similar, on the left, trade unionists, I think we have a lot in common. But I'm becoming more sympathetic as time goes on because of these agendas. Not to the genuine hardcore, thug racists, which I have no time for and you have less time for, no doubt. But for people who are worried about the identity of their country, the cultural identity of it, and the changes to it. I hear from Irish people, Tony, and they're terrified of saying anything lest they be accused of racism. These are people who never, ever entertained any of these ideas before.
Yeah, but this is not about racism.
I know it isn't, right?
During Brexit, and people should not be afraid to speak their mind. If they've been bamboozled, then more fool them. If someone is accusing you of being a racist, that doesn't mean and you're not. Someone's accusing you of being an anti-Semite and you're not. Then you just have to stand up for yourself rather than just I don't want to be accused of this. Look, this is a pathetic way to behave. So stop it, folks. Whoever's doing that.
Fair enough, T. We obviously we've talked about Russia. We haven't yet spoken about China. But I'd like to get a thought on China because Alicia Kearns is a Tory MP. It made me laugh. I'd never heard of her. 650 of them or 651, so it's kind of funny. But she gave an interview on The Run on Westminster Bridge to LBC Radio the other day, and she said that her department she's a minister, I don't know which, but something to do with foreign policy, but they want to upgrade China almost to the status of a terrorist state because the Chinese, she said, basically most of the CCTV cameras in the country were made by China, and China is using this, this fact that there are so many CCTV cameras to watch them, to take data from them, to watch how we act, how we move, what we do, what we say. China's a terrifying spectre looming large in the future, this woman said, and it's just more fear. As far as I'm concerned, it's just more fear. It's more politicians inventing phantom threats and phantom enemies to cajole or to suppress the population, to keep us living in fear. What say you?
Well, look, have a look at the online safety bill, right? They're doing the same to us. This is what they want to do. They want to shut down free speech online. I mean, this is exactly the same way as the TV people, television and radio was shut down in the 1990s. From the beginning of the 90s, you used to get some really good investigative documentaries, etc. By the 2000, there was pretty much nothing left. Or maybe one or two, but it's been completely shut down. They want to do the same to the internet. They've also got massive CCTV surveillance of us here the whole time. So it's a bit rich for them to criticise the Chinese for doing the same sort of thing. I mean, we're also talking about there's this consultation, which we've only got a few days left to the online identity consultation. Where they're trying to do a sort of similar thing to the social credit system, it seems. So you've got to have an ID. We got rid of ID cards. No, you're going to have a digital ID now if you want to do almost anything. And it's very worrying because what they're doing is they're poking their fingers towards China. And let me say, if this thing heats up in Ukraine as it may do at the end of the week, then we may see the Chinese also going into Taiwan. So they're going to be taking, these big geostrategic risk games that they're playing are rather like games of chess. And Lavrov is a very, very good chess player. And so it's all about initiative. So it looks to me as if what's going on last February and this February may be the other side starting to take the initiative. So we are going to have to react to them. But keep in mind all the time that the real problem is our elites, and they're not only going for the Russians and the Chinese, the Iranians and anybody else. I mean, that's another, going back to Putin's speech, if I can, sorry, but he made it absolutely clear. He said, we are not going to be, have done to us what was done to Saddam Hussein, what was done there's a whole succession of these various countries. Libya is another one, that they've taken down, and we're not going to have it. So, they better just forget this idea. But they're not going to forget it. They're just going to simply try and pursue this. I'm sorry I'm wandering off the point there a bit.
Oh, no, it's good. It's good. It's good. But look, before
also, I'd like to say something about Sunak, because I picked up this clip. I sat and watched his speech to the Munich Security Conference at the weekend, and there he did exactly the same thing as Liz Truss did. He mixed up they were laughing at him. Mixed up he's okay reading a script and at the podium, but as soon as he's going into a question and answer session, oh dear, he mixed up the Black Sea and the Baltic again, and he had to be corrected by some member of the public. Well, it's not the public. There's mostly Ukrainians in the audience shouting at him. What are you talking about? It's not the Baltic, it's the Black Sea. So he stumbled over. He said the Baltic twice when he meant the Black Sea. This is our leader, supposedly. And now, of course, he's not really anything to do with looking after us, Sunak. He's Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs is the Bilderberg Bank. They're the big guys at the Bilderberg. They're the people that back Hillary Clinton, Obama, etc., Biden. And, I actually met one of the guys from Goldman Sachs that was there back as a horrible bloke in Dresden in 2016 outside a pub. Bilderberg Conference signed off the Nord Stream 2 operation. That's pretty clear. The Baltops 22 exercise where they planted the mines to blow up Nord Stream 2, which is a German pipeline mainly. It's based in Switzerland. So this is the Americans blowing up a German pipeline, right? This was the people that did it. Jake Sullivan, as Cy Hirsch said, was at that Bilderberg conference in Washington, which finished the same day as that exercise started, where they planted the mines. And so Goldman and Bilderberg. The other thing, really important, I think, is that we've got. It's sometimes you just don't find out where they are. But Charlie and others in Portugal have figured out that Bilderberg is starting 17th of May this year. Be good to see you down there, Richie, if you can manage to make it. And
let's do it.
In Lisbon. And that's where these guys get together. Now, it's always more awkward for them in Europe. They like it in America, but they don't seem to like it very much in Europe.
Why is it security?
Anti-US government in Portugal, so that might be why they've decided they want to go to Portugal this year, or else they might have to cancel it and move somewhere else. I hope that's one of the things we could do. Also, I want to say something quickly about Aaron Russo, because I've been replaying some of his stuff. Absolutely amazing. What he was talking about to Alex Jones years ago.
Yeah.
Is happening, right? He was talking about basically the central bank digital currencies. He's saying, they want to have a chip, and then the chip will tell you how much you can spend on what. And this, hang on a minute, this is Aaron Russo, 2009,
the producer,
before he died, saying, and also he talks about this attitude of the elite, which is really, I think, a crucial thing to understand. Is people like him were approached to join the Council on Foreign Relations and these elite super clubs, and said no. I'm not joining that. We had Catherine Austin Fitz also saying exactly the same. She was approached to join the Council on Foreign Relations. She said, well, why would I want to join a club where I'm with you in your bunker? No, I'm with the people. And that's their attitude, is what do they care about us? They don't care about us at all. Finally, on the Nicola Bulley story, which has obviously been massive, with a body found the other day, the bodies float within 2 days if they've sunk. When someone has committed suicide or died in the water.
They do ordinarily, don't they? But not all the time. But ordinarily, yeah.
They float after 2 days. Sometimes they sink, sometimes they float.
This is to do with the gases, yeah.
They're up within a couple of days. Something's going on here. The body was found, I think, the body was found next to a main road by someone who says they were a psychic, yeah? This, to me, is all sorts of flags up the BS brigade, right? I would suggest what possibly happened is she's been abducted, killed somewhere else. We'll see in the autopsy if anyone is, honest, is doing it. And then her body dumped, because they've searched that area. It's only a mile away from the town, thoroughly over the last few days.
Yeah, sonar equipment. They walked it. They had divers. They gave it everything. Yeah,
it's appeared next to a main road. So I would suggest you want to see which cars have been driving along there over the last few days, and also very, very much question this psychic person. Big inverted commas. Oh yeah, I just kind of tuned in, man, and I found it. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're very sceptical about psychic ability, I think. But I'm not so sceptical. I think psychic ability is a real thing.
I think it is, but it's much more likely that someone has said, oh, look, you can go and check there. And then rather than explain to anybody that someone has told them to check there, that they've said, oh, I just kind of psychic about it. And then, so anyway, I just think that's one thing worth saying about that.
Do you want to hear, hang on, my friend. Would you like to hear a 90-second audio clip which will give us another take on this? The former chief prosecutor for the Northwest, Nazir Afzal, has been talking about this, and this gives us another little clue as to, the reporting of the Nicola Bulley disappearance and why they might be coming after the independent media. Tony Gosling is our guest. Have a listen to this tea. Back with you in 90 seconds. Nazir Afzal on the scourge of the independent media and conspiracy theorists.
But actually, my biggest concern has been about what social media have been doing over the last 3 weeks. The armchair sleuths, the conspiracy theorists, the defamation. I mean, if I was advising the family, I would be advising them to get some lawyers here, because there are some significant allegations made which were found to be totally unfounded and despicable, actually.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, because really, what can you do about that? It's a free country. There was huge public interest in this case. A lot of people wanting to make comment. You can't really legislate against people from having their say, or should you?
Well, you can legislate. The idea, obviously, the social media platforms have a responsibility to ensure that people don't tell lies, and don't tell lies that are damaging to somebody, and in a sense that the threats that followed the attacks on her partner. But when the social media platforms fail, then there is a need for some legislation. And one of the things that struck me was that we have here potentially the government need to look, in my view, at a new offence of obstructing a police investigation through the dissemination of information that you know to be false.
Do you hear that, T? A new offence created where you would be prosecuted for disseminating information that you know to be false.
Okay, so he's a chief prosecutor of some sort, and this is what is concerning him more than actually prosecuting any potential murderers, or whatever. So what the hell's this about? Of course, this is just fitting along with a online safety bill style agenda. We need to limit free speech. The real fault in this case, of course, has been the police, particularly the initial announcement by them that they believe she'd just fallen into the river, which I suppose, they're now saying, we were exonerated, maybe. But this, and also a failure to cordon off the area. I think that the family also criticising the police immediately, saying, well, we don't actually think that the police know what they're talking about. I think that's paraphrasing what Nicola's family was saying. And so he should be much more concerned about the appalling behaviour of the police releasing her private details. I mean, what on earth difference does it make if she's keen on a drink? It doesn't make any difference whatsoever. You need to find her, and you need to find out if someone has killed her, because they may have done that. Even if she was an alcoholic, they might have seen her as a vulnerable person, and they may have decided that she'd be an easy person to abduct or something. So the police coming out with that private personal information, completely, I mean, maybe at an inquest it might be appropriate, but it was really, I mean, the police should be sacked or whatever, dealt with, and they should not be doing any further investigations because they're clearly incompetent. And so that's one of and the other thing is, who is it that has been saying these wind-up rude things on the internet? Because it's probably someone on a troll farm, possibly over in Israel, could be anywhere.
It could be anywhere.
And so you're saying that this is members of the general public? Rubbish.
Absolutely. Listen, I'm going to wrap it up here and get the podcast online. So if you're listening to this, it didn't go out live today, but it'll just boost the podcast numbers anyway, which is no bad thing. I've been hearing from the streaming company in California. Actually, I've been hearing them while I've been speaking to you, Tony. And it's a pretty nasty attack. It's something to do with RAID, R-A-I-D technology. It's wiped the servers anyway, and they're going to have to create a new account. A new streaming account for us. So that was a pretty nasty attack. But listen, before you go, and then I will wrap it up very quickly, folks, go to thisweek.org.uk. Tony's live every Friday with guests and sometimes with co-hosts. Brilliant analysis, great discussion and chat. It's entertaining too. It's fast-paced. Not the BCFM politics show out of Bristol. Thisweek.org.uk, bilderberg.org, and please pick up a copy of The Traitors of Arnhem or The Siege of Heaven. Two of Tony's books. They are brilliant reads. I've got them here. Pick up a copy, buy them, and support a great independent broadcaster and journalist. 30 seconds for a final word to you, pal.
Well, one of the things we looked at last week was Noah's Ark. Now, I can remember in the early 70s, there was a bit of a hoo-ha. Maybe it was on the TV news or something when I was about 10 years old or so. Someone thinks they might have discovered Noah's Ark. Then the story disappeared. Anyway, it's a guy called Ron Wyre in the States. And so I did an interview with someone who knew him on last week's programme, and he's also got all sorts of other, what they call surprising discoveries. So this is in the 70s. There was a kind of big thing going on. Finally, 17th of May, 2023, Lisbon, Bilderberg. Be there.
Be there or be square. Great to have you on, pal. Love having you on. I know you'll be back real soon. Thanks for dropping in on us today. That was Tony Gosling. Cheers, T. Tony Gosling, thisweek.org.uk. Pick up a copy of The Siege of Heaven, How Breaking the Grip of Oligarchy will